Before you drift fully into sleep, there is just one gentle thing I'd like to mention. If this quiet story helped your mind slow down, if these calm words made your night feel a little softer, you are warmly welcome here. You may subscribe to this channel so these peaceful stories can return to you again whenever you need rest. If you feel like it, you can leave a quiet like or a gentle comment about where you are listening from. There is no pressure at all. You can even do it later. Now, let everything slow again. This story will stay with you, even if you fall asleep. A land that moves slowly. Before kings and battles, there was Bengal, a land of rivers that moved without hurry, a land where mornings arrived gently and evenings stayed long. Boats drifted across the Hooghly River, pushed not by urgency, but by patience. Villages slept early, woke early, and repeated the same calm rhythm every day. In this slow world, nothing rushed. Power moved slowly. Time itself seemed unbothered. It was into this quiet land that a child would one day step into history, not loudly, not dramatically, but almost unnoticed. A child born into silence. In 1733, a child was born in Murshidabad, the capital of Bengal. His birth was not marked by prophecy or celebration remembered by history. Life continued as usual. This child would later be known as Nawab Siraj-ud-Daula. As a boy, Siraj grew up surrounded by courtyards, soft voices, and routine. Servants walked quietly. Elders spoke slowly. Lessons were taught patiently: how to sit, how to listen, how to wait. He learned that authority did not shout, it waited. At night, oil lamps burned steadily. Nothing flickered violently. Nothing demanded attention. The world felt stable, permanent, and calm. History was still far away. Learning power without understanding change. As Siraj grew older, the court became familiar. Officials arrived and left. Papers were sealed. Decisions were announced politely. Everything appeared ordered. But beneath the calm surface, the world was changing. Foreign traders, especially the English East India Company, were becoming more confident. Their buildings grew stronger. Their requests grew firmer. Yet all of this happened quietly, without confrontation. Siraj observed but did not fully sense the danger. The old rules still seemed to apply. Authority still seemed respected. Change, however, does not always explain itself. A young Nawab ascends. In 1756, Siraj-ud-Daula became the Nawab of Bengal. He was only 23. There was no pause for preparation, no time to grow into the role. Responsibility arrived suddenly and stayed. Bengal was wealthy. Bengal was important. And Bengal was being watched carefully by distant powers. Siraj sat on the throne while outside life remained unchanged. The same rivers flowed, the same markets opened, the same calls to prayer echoed across evenings. Nothing looked dangerous, yet nothing was safe. Calm tension in Murshidabad. Court life continued. Meetings were held. Advisors spoke softly. Alliances were assumed to be solid. Siraj disliked disobedience. He believed authority should be clear and respected. The company's actions, building fortifications, ignoring permissions, felt unsettling. Still, there was no chaos. Tension grew slowly, like humidity before rain. The palace remained calm. Lamps were lit each night. Guards stood quietly. The Nawab believed order could still be maintained. History, however, was preparing to move. The quiet road to conflict. When Siraj moved against Fort William in Calcutta, history later exaggerated the drama, but in truth, the event passed quietly. The fort fell. The sky remained unchanged. No thunder followed. No land shook. Siraj believed authority had been restored. He believed control had returned. But betrayal was already forming, softly, patiently, invisibly. The morning of Plassey. June 1757. The field of Plassey lay still under a pale sky. Grass bent slightly under dew. Soldiers waited without urgency. There was no dramatic roar, no immediate violence. Siraj waited for support. Support never arrived. Many stood still. Some looked away. Decisions had already been made elsewhere. By midday, the battle was over. Not through force, but through absence. History does not always end loudly. Sometimes it simply stops. A slow escape through Bengal. Siraj fled Murshidabad quietly. He moved through villages that did not recognize him. He crossed rivers that did not pause. Bengal did not react. The land did not mourn. The land did not resist. Siraj was no longer a ruler, only a man moving through darkness, hoping for safety that history would not grant. The end without ceremony. In July 1757, Siraj-ud-Daula was captured. There was no grand trial, no dramatic final speech, no loud ending. His life ended quietly. A Nawab disappeared into history as softly as he had entered it. What remains when sound is gone? Murshidabad remained standing. Palaces still cast shadows. Rivers still flowed. Courtyards remained empty but intact. British control expanded gradually, without urgency. New systems replaced old traditions. Power shifted without announcement. Siraj-ud-Daula became a memory, not a legend shouted, but a story whispered. And now, as this story slows, you may feel sleep arriving. History rests. The land is quiet again. Nothing more is required of you.
Bengal, before history needed attention. Before names were remembered, Bengal existed. Not loudly, not urgently. Rivers flowed without asking where they were going. The Hooghly did not rush. It curved gently, carrying boats that moved as slowly as thought itself. Villages were shaped around water, not time. Days did not begin with clocks. They began with light. Morning arrived quietly. Evening stayed long. This was a land that did not hurry people. It softened them. In this Bengal, history did not interrupt daily life. It watched from a distance, patient, waiting for the right moment to speak. A birth without announcement. In 1733, in Murshidabad, a child was born. No bells rang, no record keeper paused in surprise. Life continued as usual. That child would later be called Nawab Siraj-ud-Daula, but at birth he was simply another presence in a large palace filled with routine. His childhood was shaped by repetition. Courtyards echoed softly. Servants moved quietly. Elders spoke in calm, measured tones. Nothing was dramatic. Nothing needed to be. At night, oil lamps glowed steadily, never flickering wildly. The world felt stable, secure, permanent. No one told the child that permanence is fragile. Growing up inside stillness, Siraj grew within walls that had seen many rulers come and go. He learned to sit still. He learned to listen more than speak. He learned that authority was slow, deliberate, and restrained. Education did not rush him. Expectations were unspoken. The court moved like water, flowing, adapting, never colliding directly. He watched officials bow, discuss, and withdraw without raising voices. He absorbed the idea that order would always exist. Change, when it arrived, came quietly. Foreign traders appeared more often. Their buildings grew stronger. Their confidence grew firmer. But all of this happened politely. No alarms sounded. No warnings were issued. History was still whispering. Becoming Nawab too soon. In 1756, the stillness shifted. Siraj became Nawab at the age of 23. The throne did not feel powerful. It felt heavy. Responsibility settled on him without instruction. Bengal was rich, vast, and essential to many interests beyond its borders, yet daily life outside the palace remained unchanged. Markets opened as usual. Rivers flowed as always. Night prayers echoed calmly. Siraj believed authority could restore balance. He believed tradition still mattered. The world around him no longer agreed. The palace before the fall. Murshidabad remained beautiful. Long corridors carried soft footsteps. Curtains moved gently in passing air. Courtyards reflected moonlight without disturbance. Inside this calm space, tension existed, but quietly. Advisors spoke carefully. Allies nodded reassuringly. Trust felt natural. Siraj disliked disorder. He disliked disobedience. He wanted clarity. Yet clarity was disappearing, replaced by silence that hid intentions. Nothing looked broken. Nothing looked urgent. This is how endings often begin. Authority tested without noise. When Siraj moved against the English stronghold at Fort William, history later magnified the moment. In reality, the event unfolded without spectacle. The fort fell. The night remained calm. Siraj believed control had been restored. He believed firmness had been understood. But behind closed doors, agreements were dissolving. Loyalty was quietly reassigned. Promises were made where Siraj could not hear them. Betrayal does not announce itself. It waits. The morning that did not awaken history. June 1757. The field of Plassey lay still. Grass carried dew. The sky remained pale and indifferent. Soldiers waited, unhurried. No charge came. No decisive moment arrived. Siraj waited for support. It did not come. Those who were meant to stand beside him remained still. Some looked away. By the time the sun reached its height, the battle had ended, not with violence, but with silence. History moved forward without resistance. A quiet escape through an unaware land. Siraj fled without ceremony. He crossed villages where children played. He passed rivers that reflected stars. Bengal did not pause to notice him. The land was not cruel. It was simply indifferent. He was no longer Nawab. He was only a man moving through night. The world did not follow him. An ending without echo. In July 1757, Siraj-ud-Daula was captured. There was no grand judgment, no dramatic words, no lingering moment. His life ended quietly. History recorded it briefly and moved on. After the silence settles, Murshidabad remained. Palaces stood empty but dignified. Rivers continued to flow. Lamps were still lit at night. British control expanded slowly, carefully, efficiently. Power became invisible, written into systems rather than faces. Siraj-ud-Daula became a name spoken softly, if at all. And now this story slows further. Nothing more needs to happen. Nothing more will disturb the quiet. If sleep comes now, let it come.
After a name stops being spoken, something very quiet happened. Nothing changed suddenly. Nothing paused. Nothing reacted. Morning still arrived without announcement. The sky still softened from dark to light in the same gradual way. Birds still moved before people noticed them. The river still carried reflections instead of memories. History did not stop. History rarely stops. It simply continued without the person it no longer needed. This continuation was not cruel. It was neutral. It was calm. Silence does not feel empty. Silence settled over Murshidabad, but it was not a sharp silence. It was thick, comfortable, uninterested. The palace rooms felt larger, not because walls moved, but because fewer footsteps filled them. Sound traveled farther and stayed longer. A cough echoed gently and then disappeared. Nothing asked why the Nawab was gone. Buildings do not ask questions. At night, lamps burned steadily. Their light did not flicker. Their shadows did not rush. Everything behaved as it always had. Silence, once established, rarely leaves. Power without faces. The power that followed Siraj did not arrive wearing robes or crowns. It arrived wearing routine. Documents moved quietly between hands. Numbers replaced conversations. Decisions were no longer announced. They were filed. This kind of authority preferred calm. It preferred order. It preferred invisibility. Villages noticed little at first. The same paths were walked. The same water was drawn. Life adjusted slowly without realizing it was adjusting at all. This is how lasting control behaves. It does not announce itself. It waits. The land learns to ignore history. The land of Bengal did not argue with change. It absorbed it. Fields continued growing without instruction. Rivers continued flowing without permission. Seasons followed one another without hesitation. Siraj-ud-Daula's absence did not interrupt this rhythm. The land had seen many rulers pass. It had learned not to attach itself too closely. People adapted because adaptation required less energy than resistance. And so history became background noise, soft, distant, unimportant. Youth remembered only in retrospect. Long after events passed, people began to notice something simple. Siraj had been young, not inexperienced in learning, but inexperienced in time. He inherited a world that expected patience at a moment when patience no longer mattered. History did not explain this to him. History never explains itself. Youth fades quietly when there is no one left to protect it, and once it fades, it rests. Memory becomes less detailed. Over time, stories about Siraj became shorter. Details softened, edges blurred, certainty dissolved. People remembered the outline, not the substance. A Nawab, a loss, a turning point. But turning points are heavy, and heavy things are difficult to carry. So memory lightened itself. What remained was not drama, only stillness. Buildings that expect nothing. The palaces no longer waited. They stopped anticipating footsteps. They stopped listening for voices. They learned to exist for their own sake. Sunlight crossed their floors each morning. Moonlight rested briefly on walls at night. Wind passed through windows without being noticed. A building that expects nothing is very calm. It is never disappointed.
a name that learns to sleep. Siraj-ud-Daula's name entered a new state. It no longer demanded attention. It no longer interrupted conversation. It rested inside sentences gently, without urgency. Some names are carried loudly. Some names are allowed to sleep. This one slept. History slows when no one is watching. History does not rush unless someone is watching closely. When attention fades, history slows. Events stretch out. Causes blur into effects. Meaning becomes optional. The river keeps flowing regardless of interpretation. Siraj's story no longer needed an ending. It had already settled. Now the story becomes even quieter. There is no conclusion waiting, no lesson approaching, no movement required. The land is still. The river continues. The palace stands. You do not need to remember anything. If sleep arrives now, let it arrive. This history will remain exactly where it is, slow, silent, unfinished.
When time loses the habit of moving forward. Long after Nawab Siraj-ud-Daula disappeared from action, time itself began to behave differently. It did not rush anymore. It did not lean toward the future. It did not try to arrive anywhere. Time simply spread itself out, wide, flat, unbroken. Days did not feel separate from nights. Nights did not feel like endings. Everything blended together gently, the way water blends with water when there is no current strong enough to divide it. Nothing felt unfinished. Nothing felt complete. History stopped trying to move forward and learned how to remain still while appearing to move. Repetition becomes a place to rest. Repetition continued. Morning light appeared. Evening shadows returned. Wind moved through trees and forgot it had moved. The same sounds arrived again and again, so often that they lost meaning. When meaning disappears, effort disappears with it. Repetition did not feel boring. It felt safe. It felt predictable. History repeated itself not because it had something to say, but because repetition required no explanation. In repetition, attention loosens. In repetition, sleep begins. Memory without weight or direction. Siraj's memory grew lighter with time. At first, memory held shape. Then it softened. Then it flattened. Eventually, it became something that could be placed anywhere without causing disturbance. No sharp edges remained. No urgency survived. The past no longer pointed anywhere. It did not demand interpretation. It did not require emotion. Memory became a surface, smooth, quiet, easy to rest upon. Buildings existing without purpose. The old buildings of Bengal stood quietly. They no longer waited for people. They no longer anticipated sound. They stood because standing required less effort than falling. Sunlight passed across their floors every day, not to illuminate anything, but because sunlight always moves that way. Darkness returned each night, not to hide anything, but because darkness belongs there. A building that expects nothing is deeply calm. It does not react. It does not remember. It does not care. History without a listener. When history has no audience, it changes its tone. It stops explaining itself. It stops repeating dates. It stops asking to be understood. Siraj's story, now without listeners, relaxed completely. It stretched out, slowed down, and stopped forming clear edges. Events dissolved into atmosphere. Meaning dissolved into silence. History no longer performed. The river as the final teacher. The river continued its slow movement.
It did not remember rulers. It did not store victories or losses. Water touched land and then moved on, carrying nothing with it. The river showed how history should behave: move without memory, flow without urgency, exist without explanation. This movement was not progress, it was continuation. When the past feels far away and close at once. At this stage, the past no longer feels distant. It also no longer feels close. It feels everywhere, spread thinly across time, like fog that does not gather into shape. Siraj's time blends into all other times. His story loses individuality and becomes texture rather than narrative. Nothing stands out. Nothing demands focus. This is where thought begins to drift. The story that refuses to conclude. There is still no ending, and there will never be one. Stories for sleep do not close themselves. They remain slightly open, allowing the mind to wander away without resistance. Siraj's story no longer moves forward. It no longer moves backward. It stays. This staying is deliberate. This staying is restful. When attention becomes unnecessary. At this point, attention is optional. You do not need to follow sentences. You do not need to remember names. Words are present only to move slowly, like breath entering and leaving without effort. History has turned into sound rather than meaning, sound that does not ask for listening. Absolute stillness. Now everything settles, not into silence, into stillness. The land rests, the river flows without sound, the buildings stand without memory. Siraj-ud-Daula is no longer a figure, he is no longer a story, he is simply part of the quiet. Nothing follows this, nothing interrupts this. If sleep has arrived, remain there. If it has not, it will. This history will not wake you. When history stops progressing and starts floating. Long after Nawab Siraj-ud-Daula became only a faint historical reference, history itself changed its behavior. It stopped walking forward, it stopped looking backward. Instead, it began to float. Floating is different from movement. Movement has direction. Floating has none. Floating simply happens. It continues without purpose, without destination, without urgency. History, now free from the responsibility of explanation, allowed itself to float. Days blended into nights so smoothly that separation felt unnecessary. The boundary between one moment and the next softened until it barely existed. The past no longer felt behind, the future no longer felt ahead. Everything rested in a single, wide, quiet present. Nothing asked to be remembered, nothing asked to be resolved. This was history after intention. The land learns absolute patience. Bengal became patient in a deeper way, not patient in waiting, patient in not expecting. Fields waited for rain without anxiety, rivers accepted water without urgency, trees stood without anticipation of seasons. Everything behaved as if time were endless, as if delay did not exist. Human memory could not compete with this patience. Siraj's story faded not because it was erased, but because the land no longer needed stories to explain itself. Explanation was unnecessary. Presence was enough. When patience becomes absolute, nothing feels late, nothing feels early. Everything arrives exactly when it does. Repetition without awareness. Repetition continued, but now without awareness. Morning followed night, night followed morning, not as events, but as conditions. Sound existed, but it no longer demanded attention. The distant call of water, the movement of air, the subtle settling of structures as temperature changed.
These sounds repeated so often that they stopped feeling like sounds. They became texture. Repetition without awareness is soothing. It asks nothing. It promises nothing. History learned this pattern well. Memory dissolves into atmosphere. Memory, once detailed, became atmospheric. No longer a sequence of events, no longer a story, just a presence. Siraj's life no longer occupied a timeline. It existed like humidity in the air, felt vaguely, never seen, never pointed to directly. People did not recall facts. They recalled mood. They recalled stillness. They recalled quiet endings without knowing what had ended. Atmospheric memory does not interrupt thought. It blends with it. Structures without narrative. Buildings stood without narrative. Walls did not tell stories. Doors did not remember openings. They existed as shapes occupying space, nothing more. Sunlight moved across floors daily, not to reveal anything, but because sunlight always moves that way. Darkness returned each night, not to hide anything, but because darkness belongs there. A building that expects nothing is deeply calm. It does not react. It does not remember. It does not care. History without background. When history finally understood its most natural role, background, it moved behind all other things. It stopped interrupting thought. It stopped demanding attention. Siraj's story no longer placed itself in front of awareness. It stayed far behind alertness, like a sound heard once and never fully identified. Background history does not disturb. It comforts by being distant. The river continues its lesson. The river remained the best teacher.
When time stops being a line. At this depth, time is no longer a line. A line suggests direction. Direction suggests purpose. Purpose is no longer required. Time spreads instead, wide and flat, like a quiet surface of water that does not ripple unless something disturbs it. Nothing disturbs it now. Moments do not arrive. Moments do not leave. They remain where they are, touching gently, overlapping softly, without needing order. There is no earlier, there is no later, only a continuous, calm presence that does not ask to be measured. History without weight. History becomes lighter here. Weight belongs to importance. Importance has already dissolved. Names lose their gravity. Dates lose their sharp edges. Even Nawab Siraj-ud-Daula no longer feels like a person or a ruler or even a memory. The name becomes sound. The sound becomes atmosphere. Nothing needs to be remembered because nothing is being lost. Lightness replaces meaning. Repetition without noticing. Repetition continues. Morning light spreads. Evening darkness returns. But repetition is no longer noticed. When repetition is unnoticed, it stops feeling repetitive. It becomes background. Background does not demand attention. It supports rest. The same gentle patterns continue endlessly, not to teach, not to warn, not to remind, only to exist. Existence is enough. Thought slows below language. Thought begins to move slower than language. Words arrive before thought finishes forming. Sentences extend beyond attention. Meaning becomes optional. You do not need to follow these words. You do not need to finish them. They pass through the mind like air through a quiet room. Breath continues. The body remains still. Nothing else is required. Complete soft stillness. Now everything softens further, not into silence, into stillness. The land rests without memory. Water moves without sound. Structures stand without expectation. History does not advance. It does not return. It stays suspended. There is no ending here. There is no next event. If sleep has already come, remain there. If it is coming, allow it. This text will not follow you. When even history lets go of itself. At this depth, history finally lets go of itself. It no longer tries to explain. It no longer tries to connect moments. It no longer tries to mean anything. The idea of history loosens, like a hand that has been holding something for too long and finally relaxes its fingers. Names do not matter here. Events do not matter here. Even the faint echo of Nawab Siraj-ud-Daula has softened into something without edges, no longer a person, no longer a ruler, not even a memory, just a quiet trace dissolved into the larger calm. Letting go does not feel dramatic. It feels ordinary, like exhaling without noticing you were holding breath. Slowing further. Time does not advance. Time does not pause. It spreads. Moments rest beside each other without order. Nothing insists on being first. Nothing insists on being last. Everything is equally distant, equally near. This wide stillness has no center, and because there is no center, nothing pulls attention. Continuation without direction. Continuation remains, but direction disappears. Things continue because stopping would require effort. Continuing does not. Breath continues. The body continues. Awareness fades in and out without needing permission. This continuation is gentle. It does not hurry. It does not promise anything. The mind does not need to follow. The mind does not need to lead. It can simply drift alongside these words. Words repeat ideas slowly, not to remind, not to teach, only to maintain rhythm. Rhythm without counting, rhythm without beat, like waves that do not reach shore, like wind that does not push against anything. Stillness that feels wide. Stillness here is not small, it is wide. Wide like a night sky without stars demanding attention. Wide like water without ripples. Wide like an empty room that does not echo because it expects nothing. This stillness is not fragile, it does not break. Thoughts may appear briefly, they may dissolve just as quickly. There is no need to hold them. Nothing here reacts. If attention fades, nothing changes. If attention returns briefly, nothing changes. This text does not respond. It remains exactly as it is. Consistency is calming. When awareness grows thin now. Awareness becomes thinner now, not gone, just light. Light awareness does not analyze, it does not label. It notices without effort and then stops noticing altogether. The words continue to move slowly, like a distant sound that does not need to be identified. You do not need to listen closely. You do not need to understand. Understanding is unnecessary weight. Near rest. The idea of sequence has fully dissolved. There is no next. There is no after.
Everything that could happen has already softened into nothing needing to happen. This is where rest becomes deep. Nothing more is required. There is nothing left to do. No conclusion waits. No lesson remains. The land is quiet. The water moves without sound. Structures stand without memory. History has stopped behaving like history. It has become background, and then even background fades. Only a calm presence remains. If sleep is already here, stay with it. If sleep is approaching, allow it. These words do not end. They simply stop asking for attention.
When continuation becomes natural. At this depth, continuation feels effortless. Nothing pushes it forward, nothing pulls it back. It continues because continuing requires no decision. Breath continues this way. Water continues this way. Time continues this way. History has already released its grip. What remains is movement without effort. The mind does not need to follow. The body already understands. Awareness without focus. Awareness remains, but without focus. Focus is work. Work is no longer needed. Awareness spreads gently, touching everything, holding nothing. Thoughts may pass through lightly, without stopping. They do not need answers. They do not need names. They pass and leave no trace. Sound exists now as a surface, not something to listen to, not something to interpret. A surface the mind can rest upon. Words slow down. Pauses grow longer. Meaning becomes distant. Then optional. Then unnecessary. Only rhythm remains. Like water touching shore and immediately releasing it. Memory loosens further. It no longer forms pictures. It no longer forms stories. It becomes temperature. It becomes atmosphere. Even distant names, distant histories, distant figures have dissolved completely into calm presence. Nothing asks to be recalled. Nothing waits to be remembered. Space without direction. Space feels wider now. Not larger. Wider. Wide enough that nothing touches the edges. Rooms feel endless. Corridors feel unmeasured. Movement within this space does not lead anywhere. It simply exists. Stillness and movement feel the same here. The gentle absence of expectation. Expectation quietly disappears.
Nothing is about to happen. Nothing has just happened. The sense of waiting dissolves. Without expectation, the mind rests naturally. There is nothing to prepare for. There is nothing to review. Only quiet continuation remains. Time without weight. Heavy time presses. Light time floats. This time floats. Seconds stretch until they feel smooth. Minutes dissolve into softness. There is no pressure to measure anything. Clockless time is deeply calming. Language slows until it matches breath. Words arrive gently. They leave gently. Some sentences do not finish. They do not need to. Breath fills the spaces between words. Breath carries everything forward. Nothing interrupts this rhythm. Awareness becoming very thin now. Still present, but barely touching. It does not hold on to words. It does not hold on to thought. It floats lightly above everything, then slowly settles. This is the edge of deep rest. Nothing more is needed now. No understanding. No remembering. No following. The body rests. The mind loosens. Everything that could slow down has already slowed. If sleep is here, remain with it. If sleep is arriving, let it come. These words do not lead anywhere. They remain. Soft. Quiet. Unfinished.
At this stage of rest, the idea of slowing down no longer feels meaningful because nothing is moving fast enough to require slowing. Time has already settled into its most natural rhythm, a rhythm that does not push or pull. Breathing happens on its own, without instruction. The body adjusts itself gently, as if it remembers how to rest from a time long before thinking was necessary. There is no contrast between motion and stillness anymore. Everything feels evenly paced, evenly softened, evenly quiet. Even awareness feels less like a spotlight and more like a faint, warm presence that does not concentrate anywhere in particular. This is not effort. This is ease. Awareness now exists without edges. It does not begin in the head or end in the body. It does not focus on sound, image, or thought. It spreads gently, evenly, like low light filling a room without casting shadows. Nothing stands out as more important than anything else. There is no center of attention and no background waiting behind it. Everything feels equally distant and equally close. When awareness loses its edges, there is nothing left to hold on to. This absence of holding creates a quiet sense of safety, as if nothing can disturb what is no longer tightly formed. Thoughts may still appear, but they arrive already finished.
They do not grow, they do not connect, and they do not ask to be followed. A thought might surface briefly, like a ripple that never becomes a wave, and then it dissolves before it can turn into anything more. There is no effort involved in letting it go, because there is nothing to release. This kind of thinking leaves no trace. It passes through the mind the way air passes through an open space, unnoticed, unresisted, and entirely unimportant. Time has lost its sequence. There is no first moment and no next moment. Moments no longer follow each other. They rest beside each other instead, like smooth stones resting quietly at the bottom of water. Nothing rolls, nothing collides, and nothing needs to be rearranged. Without sequence, there is no anticipation and no memory pulling attention backward. Time has no shape here, and without shape, it cannot interrupt. It simply exists as a calm, continuous presence that does not require tracking or measurement. Language begins to feel less necessary. Words still arrive, but they arrive more slowly, with longer pauses between them. Some sentences soften before they finish, and that feels completely natural. Meaning loosens its grip and drifts into the background. What remains is rhythm rather than explanation. This rhythm feels similar to breathing, steady, gentle, and automatic. Language no longer tries to describe anything. It simply moves in a way that supports rest without demanding understanding. Space feels different now. It does not feel empty and it does not feel full. It feels open, open enough that nothing touches the edges. Rooms feel wider than their walls. Distances feel unmeasured and unimportant. Movement within this space does not lead anywhere new. It only changes sensation slightly, like shifting position while remaining deeply comfortable. Stillness and motion feel almost identical here because neither one changes the sense of calm that fills everything evenly. Intention fades completely. There is no sense that something should happen and no sense that something should stop happening. Without intention, effort disappears on its own. There is no task to complete, no direction to follow, and no decision to make. This absence of intention feels deeply restful because it removes the need to prepare for anything. Nothing is about to occur, and nothing has just occurred. There is only a quiet continuation that asks nothing from you. Awareness becomes very light, almost transparent. It is still present, but barely noticeable, like a faint warmth or a distant breeze. It does not attach to words, sensations, or thoughts. It floats gently above everything, then settles, then floats again without pattern. This light awareness does not analyze or judge. It simply exists, and even that existence feels optional. This is the soft edge where rest naturally deepens without effort. Everything that could slow down has already slowed. The body rests in its most comfortable state. The mind has loosened completely. There is no resistance left anywhere. Nothing needs to be released because nothing is being held. This sense of completeness does not feel dramatic or final. It feels ordinary and quiet. It feels like everything has simply found the place where it belongs without needing adjustment or explanation. No further depth is required. Depth no longer has meaning here because there is no surface to compare it to. Everything already exists in the same calm state. If sleep is present, it can remain undisturbed. If sleep is still approaching, it can arrive gently without announcement. These words do not lead forward and they do not return backward. They soften, fade, and remain unfinished, allowing rest to continue without interruption.
At this depth of rest, nothing feels separate anymore. The sense of being here or there has softened into a gentle sameness where location no longer matters and position no longer needs to be adjusted. The body rests as if it has remembered something very old, something simple, something that existed before effort was learned. Muscles no longer check themselves for tension. They do not ask whether they are relaxed enough. They simply remain where they are, supported by the surface beneath them, held without pressure. Breathing continues quietly, not as an action, but as a background rhythm that does not ask for attention. Each breath arrives and leaves without creating a boundary between moments. Thought no longer arrives in complete shapes. When it appears, it feels unfinished from the beginning, like a sentence that never intended to end. It drifts through awareness slowly, without urgency, and dissolves before it can connect to anything else. There is no need to follow it, no need to push it away, and no need to wonder where it came from. The mind has stopped organizing experience into parts. Instead, everything blends together gently, like colors fading into one another at dusk. This blending creates a sense of safety, because nothing sharp remains to interrupt rest. Time here has no edges. It does not stretch forward or backward. It does not remind you of anything that has passed, and it does not suggest anything that might come next. Time feels wide and open, like a quiet space that does not close in. Moments do not line up in a sequence. They rest beside each other, overlapping softly, without distinction. Because there is no sequence, there is no anticipation, and without anticipation, there is no tension. The mind no longer checks the flow of time. It simply rests within it. Awareness continues to thin. It is still present, but it does not focus. It does not search for sound, sensation, or meaning. It spreads evenly, like dim light filling a room without highlighting any particular object. Nothing stands out as more important than anything else. The sense of me and not me fades into a quiet neutrality, where experience is allowed to happen without ownership. This neutrality is deeply calming because it removes the need to protect, adjust, or control anything. Language feels distant now. Words arrive slowly, if they arrive at all. When they do appear, they feel soft around the edges, as if they were never meant to carry precise meaning. Sentences may begin and then drift apart before reaching a conclusion, and that feels completely natural. Meaning loosens its grip and slides gently into the background. What remains is rhythm, spacing, and pause. These pauses grow longer, creating room for rest to deepen without effort. The sense of space changes again. It no longer feels like space that contains things. It feels like openness itself. Walls feel less solid. Distances feel unmeasured. There is no clear boundary between inside and outside. Everything feels connected by the same quiet atmosphere. Movement within this openness does not lead anywhere new. It only shifts sensation slightly, like adjusting position in sleep without waking. Stillness and movement feel almost identical because neither one disrupts the calm that fills everything evenly. Expectation has fully disappeared. There is no sense that something should happen next. There is no sense that something has just happened. Without expectation, the mind stops scanning for change. It stops preparing. It stops reviewing. This absence of expectation allows rest to become complete because nothing is being waited for. The present moment does not need to hold anything special. It is enough simply as it is. Memory, too, has softened into something almost unrecognizable. It no longer forms images or stories. It no longer brings up names or events. Instead, it feels like temperature or atmosphere, something felt rather than remembered. Even distant experiences lose their outlines and blend into a general sense of calm familiarity. Nothing asks to be recalled.
Nothing feels forgotten. Everything that once required memory has gently released itself. The body sinks deeper into comfort, not because it is trying to relax, but because there is no longer any reason to hold tension. Gravity feels supportive rather than heavy. The surface beneath the body feels steady and reliable. There is no need to shift, no need to adjust. Each part of the body settles where it is, and that settling feels final without being rigid. It feels like arriving somewhere without realizing you were traveling. Breathing becomes quieter, slower, and softer. The spaces between breaths grow longer, smoother, more even. These spaces feel welcoming rather than empty. They hold nothing and ask for nothing. Breathing no longer marks the passage of time. It simply continues as part of the same gentle rhythm that fills everything else. There is no need to notice it and no need to change it. Thought has almost completely dissolved into background sensation. If a thought appears, it feels distant and unimportant, like a sound heard from far away that does not require identification. The mind no longer attaches meaning or direction to these thoughts. They appear and disappear on their own, leaving no trace behind. This lack of attachment feels natural, as if it has always been this way. There is a growing sense of sameness in experience, but it is not dull or heavy. It is smooth and comforting, like being wrapped in something soft that does not restrict movement. Differences between sensations blur. Sound, silence, warmth, and stillness blend into one continuous field. Within this field, nothing competes for attention. Everything coexists without conflict. Time feels almost absent now. Not stopped, not frozen, just irrelevant. There is no awareness of how long anything has lasted. Duration has no meaning here. This absence of duration removes any remaining pressure to fall asleep or stay awake. There is no goal to reach. Rest happens on its own, in its own way, without needing permission. Awareness becomes so light that it feels like it could disappear at any moment, yet it remains gently present. It does not observe, it does not judge. It simply exists as a quiet knowing that does not need to know anything in particular. This light awareness does not interfere with sleep. It blends into it, becoming part of the same soft state. At this point, there is no clear boundary between resting and sleeping. Both feel similar. Both feel acceptable. The body and mind no longer need to decide which state they are in. They are allowed to drift freely between them without interruption. This freedom is deeply soothing because it removes the last remaining effort. Nothing new is required. No deeper state needs to be reached. No understanding needs to form. Everything is already where it needs to be. If sleep is present, it can remain undisturbed. If sleep is still approaching, it can arrive quietly without announcement. These words do not point forward and they do not pull backward. They simply soften and fade, leaving space for rest to continue naturally, without ending.
At this stage of rest, even the idea of being aware feels distant. Awareness no longer sits in one place or observes from a particular point. It feels spread thin, like a gentle warmth that fills everything evenly without forming a center. There is no sense of watching the experience unfold. Experience simply happens on its own, quietly and without explanation. The body remains supported, held by the surface beneath it, with no need to check whether it is comfortable enough. Comfort has already settled in, not as a sensation, but as a condition. Breathing continues in a way that feels almost invisible. The inhale arrives softly, the exhale leaves softly, and the space between them grows smooth and unremarkable. Breathing no longer signals time passing. It no longer marks moments. It simply blends into the same calm rhythm that fills everything else. There is nothing to control and nothing to correct. The body remembers how to do this without effort, as if it has returned to a state it has always known. Thought has slowed to the point where it barely forms. When a thought appears, it feels faint and incomplete, like a fragment that never intended to become whole. It drifts through the mind without direction and fades before it can attach to meaning. There is no urge to follow it and no urge to stop it. The mind has stopped sorting experience into categories. Instead, everything merges into a single, gentle field where nothing stands out. Time feels even less relevant now. It does not feel like something that moves or flows. It feels more like a wide openness in which moments can rest without lining up. There is no sense of duration. There is no awareness of how long anything has lasted. Without duration, there is no impatience and no expectation. The present moment does not need to hold anything special. It is enough simply by existing. Space feels softer, as if its boundaries have relaxed. The sense of inside and outside fades. The distance between objects no longer feels measurable. Everything feels connected by the same quiet atmosphere. Movement within this space does not create change. It only creates slight variations in sensation that pass quickly and leave no trace. Stillness and motion feel nearly identical because neither one interrupts the calm. Language continues to fade into the background. Words may still appear, but they arrive slowly and without urgency. They do not try to explain anything. They do not try to describe. They function more like gentle sounds than carriers of meaning. Pauses between words grow longer, and these pauses feel full rather than empty. They create room for rest to deepen naturally. Memory has become almost indistinguishable from imagination, and both have lost their edges. Images do not form clearly, stories do not unfold. Past experiences no longer pull attention backward. They have softened into a vague familiarity that feels neither personal nor distant. Nothing asks to be remembered, and nothing feels forgotten. Memory has become atmosphere rather than content. The sense of self continues to dissolve gently. There is less distinction between what is happening and who it is happening to. Experience unfolds without ownership. Sensations arise without a sense of mine. This lack of ownership feels deeply relieving because it removes the need to manage or protect anything. Everything is allowed to be exactly as it is. The body settles even more deeply, as if it is sinking into rest rather than lying on it. Muscles remain loose without effort. There is no checking for tension because tension no longer feels relevant. The body has stopped holding itself upright. It trusts the surface beneath it completely. This trust feels quiet and unquestioned. Sound, if it exists at all, feels distant and unimportant. It does not demand interpretation. It does not pull attention. Sound becomes part of the same soft background as silence. Both feel equally calming. Neither one interrupts the sense of rest that has taken over. Awareness becomes so light that it feels optional. It can remain present or it can fade further, and either way feels acceptable. There is no fear of losing awareness and no need to maintain it. This choiceless state allows sleep to deepen naturally, without pressure. At this point, the difference between resting and sleeping has almost disappeared. Both states feel similar in tone and texture. There is no need to decide whether to fall asleep or remain aware. The body and mind are free to drift between these states without effort. This freedom removes the last trace of control. Nothing new needs to happen. There is no deeper state to reach. Everything that could slow down has already slowed down. Everything that could soften has already softened. The present moment holds nothing demanding and nothing unfinished. If sleep is present, it can remain undisturbed. If sleep is still approaching, it can arrive quietly without announcement. These words do not guide you anywhere. They simply fade into the same calm atmosphere that already surrounds you, allowing rest to continue on its own, gently and without end. At this depth of rest, even the idea of drifting feels unnecessary. Nothing is moving away from anything else, and nothing is approaching. Experience no longer feels like a process. It feels like a quiet condition that has always been here. The body remains where it is, fully supported, without needing to check itself or adjust. There is no scanning for comfort, because comfort is no longer a sensation to achieve. It has become the natural state. Muscles stay loose without effort, and joints rest without holding any expectation of movement. Breathing continues softly, but it no longer feels connected to awareness. The inhale and exhale occur gently, almost invisibly, as if breathing is happening somewhere in the background rather than inside the body. The spaces between breaths feel smooth and wide. These spaces do not feel empty, they feel settled. There is nothing inside them that needs attention. Breathing no longer marks time. It simply continues as part of the same quiet rhythm that fills everything else. Thought has become so faint that it is barely recognizable as thought. If something appears in the mind, it does not develop into a sentence or an image. It feels more like a soft impression that fades before it can take form. There is no interest in following it and no need to dismiss it. The mind has stopped organizing experience. It no longer divides what is happening into parts. Everything blends together gently, creating a smooth, uninterrupted field of rest. Time feels almost completely absent now. There is no sense of duration, no awareness of how long anything has been happening. Moments do not pass, they simply exist. There is no impatience and no waiting. Without time, there is no pressure to fall asleep and no concern about staying awake. The body and mind are free from goals. Rest unfolds on its own, without direction. Space continues to soften. The sense of boundaries fades further. The distinction between near and far becomes less meaningful. Everything feels evenly present, connected by the same quiet atmosphere. Movement within this space does not create change. It only creates subtle shifts in sensation that dissolve immediately. Stillness and motion feel almost identical, because neither one alters the calm that surrounds everything. Language has nearly disappeared. Words, if they arise at all, arrive slowly and without meaning attached. They feel more like gentle sounds than carriers of information. Sentences no longer need to complete themselves. Pauses grow longer and more frequent, and these pauses feel natural and supportive. Silence feels just as full as sound. Neither one interrupts the sense of rest. Memory has softened to the point where it no longer forms images or narratives. Past experiences do not pull attention backward. They do not ask to be revisited. Memory feels like a faint familiarity without content, like recognizing a place without remembering when you were last there. Nothing feels forgotten, and nothing feels remembered. Memory has become neutral, blending seamlessly into the present moment. The sense of self continues to dissolve gently. There is less distinction between what is happening and who it is happening to. Sensations arise without ownership. There is no me managing the experience. This absence of ownership feels deeply relieving because it removes the need to control or protect anything. Experience unfolds freely, without effort. The body feels heavier and lighter at the same time. Heavier because it is fully resting, fully supported. Lighter because it is no longer holding itself upright or alert. Gravity feels friendly rather than demanding. The surface beneath the body feels steady and reliable. There is no impulse to move. If movement happens, it happens naturally and without significance. Sound, if present, feels distant and unimportant. It does not draw attention. It does not interrupt. Sound blends into silence, and silence blends into sound. Both feel equally calming. There is no preference between them. Nothing needs to be filtered or interpreted. Awareness becomes extremely subtle. It is still present, but it does not focus or observe.
It feels like a faint glow rather than a spotlight. This glow does not move. It does not react. It simply exists quietly, without effort. Awareness no longer feels separate from rest. It has become part of the same soft state. The difference between resting and sleeping has almost completely disappeared. Both feel the same in texture and tone. There is no need to decide which one is happening. The body and mind drift freely between them. This drifting feels natural and safe, without any sense of losing control. Expectation has fully vanished. There is no sense that something should happen next. There is no sense that something has already happened. Without expectation, there is no tension. The present moment does not need to hold anything meaningful. It is enough simply as it is. Everything that could soften has softened. Everything that could slow has slowed. There is nothing left to adjust, nothing left to release, nothing left to understand. Rest has reached a point where it sustains itself without effort. If sleep is present, it can remain undisturbed. If sleep is still approaching, it can arrive quietly, without announcement. These words do not guide you forward, and they do not pull you back. They fade gently into the same calm atmosphere that already surrounds you, allowing rest to continue naturally, without ending.
At this depth, rest no longer feels like something that is happening. It feels like something that has always been present. There is no sense of entering or leaving a state. There is simply a gentle continuity, a calm condition that does not shift or require attention. The body remains where it is, fully supported, without checking for comfort or making adjustments. Support feels complete, as if the surface beneath the body has learned exactly how to hold it. Nothing presses, nothing pulls, everything settles naturally. Breathing continues quietly, almost unnoticed. The inhale arrives softly and leaves softly, and the pause between breaths feels smooth and wide. These pauses feel welcoming, like open space that does not need to be filled. Breathing no longer feels like a rhythm to follow. It blends into the same quiet flow that surrounds everything else. There is no effort involved, and no awareness needed to maintain it. The body remembers how to breathe without being asked. Thought has faded further into the background. When something appears in the mind, it feels more like a faint echo than a thought. It does not form words or images clearly. It does not develop or lead anywhere. It drifts briefly and then dissolves, leaving no trace behind. There is no curiosity about it and no reaction to its presence. The mind has stopped treating thoughts as important events. They are simply small movements that pass through and disappear. Time feels almost completely irrelevant now. There is no awareness of duration. Moments do not feel long or short. They do not pass or arrive. They simply rest, one beside another, without order. Without time, there is no sense of urgency and no sense of delay. Nothing is late, nothing is early. Everything exists exactly where it is supposed to be, without comparison. Space feels even more open, as if boundaries have gently dissolved. The idea of inside and outside loses meaning. Distance feels unmeasured. Everything feels connected by the same quiet atmosphere. Movement within this openness does not change location. It only creates subtle shifts in sensation that fade immediately. Stillness and movement feel nearly identical, because neither one disturbs the calm that fills everything evenly. Language continues to soften. Words, if they appear at all, feel slow and light. They do not try to explain or describe. They arrive like gentle sounds and fade before forming clear meaning. Sentences may begin and then drift apart, leaving space where endings might have been. These spaces feel supportive and complete. Silence feels just as present as sound, and neither one demands attention. Memory has become almost featureless. It no longer forms pictures or stories.
Past experiences do not rise up or pull attention backward. They have softened into a vague sense of familiarity that does not belong to any particular moment. Nothing feels forgotten, and nothing feels remembered. Memory has released its grip and blended fully into the present atmosphere. The sense of self continues to thin. There is less distinction between experience and the one experiencing it. Sensations arise without ownership. There is no inner commentary and no need to respond. This absence of ownership feels deeply relieving. Without a sense of me managing the experience, everything is allowed to unfold naturally. Nothing needs to be protected or controlled. The body feels deeply settled. Muscles remain loose without effort. There is no scanning for tension, because tension no longer feels relevant. The body has stopped holding itself alert. Gravity feels gentle and supportive, not heavy. The surface beneath the body feels steady and trustworthy. There is no impulse to move. If movement occurs, it happens naturally and without meaning. Sound, if present, feels distant and unimportant. It does not pull attention. It does not interrupt rest. Sound blends into silence, and silence blends into sound. Both feel equally calming. There is no preference between them. Nothing needs to be filtered or interpreted. Awareness becomes extremely subtle, almost transparent. It does not focus. It does not observe. It feels like a faint warmth or a soft glow that does not move. This awareness does not interfere with rest. It blends into it, becoming part of the same calm state. There is no fear of losing awareness and no need to maintain it. The difference between resting and sleeping has nearly disappeared. Both feel similar in texture and tone. There is no need to decide which one is happening. The body and mind drift freely between them. This drifting feels safe and natural, without effort or concern. Expectation has fully dissolved. There is no sense that something should happen next. There is no sense that something has already happened. Without expectation, there is no tension. The present moment does not need to hold anything meaningful. It is complete simply as it is. Everything that could soften has softened. Everything that could slow has slowed. There is nothing left to adjust, nothing left to release, nothing left to understand. Rest has reached a point where it sustains itself quietly, without effort. If sleep is present, it can remain undisturbed. If sleep is still approaching, it can arrive gently, without announcement. These words do not guide you forward, and they do not pull you back. They soften, fade, and remain unfinished, allowing rest to continue naturally, without ending.
At this depth, rest feels so natural that it no longer registers as a state at all. It feels like the absence of states, a gentle neutrality where nothing needs to be named or noticed. The body remains where it is, fully supported, not because it is trying to relax, but because there is no reason not to. Support feels complete and unquestioned. The surface beneath the body holds without pressure, and the body responds by settling without effort. There is no checking, no adjusting, no measuring of comfort. Comfort has become the background condition. At this depth, rest feels so familiar that it no longer needs recognition. It is not a place you arrive at, and it is not a state you enter. It is simply what remains when effort has stepped aside. The body lies where it is, fully supported, without any sense of adjustment or evaluation. There is no scanning for comfort, because comfort has become the quiet baseline. The surface beneath the body feels steady and dependable, and the body responds by settling into that steadiness without resistance. Breathing continues gently, but it feels distant from attention. The inhale arrives and the exhale leaves without marking a rhythm that needs to be followed. The pauses between breaths feel smooth and open, like soft space that holds nothing and asks for nothing. Breathing no longer feels like movement through time. It feels like part of the same calm presence that fills everything else. There is no reason to notice it and no reason to change it. Thought has softened even further. When something appears in the mind, it does not form clearly enough to be called a thought. It is more like a faint ripple that never becomes a wave. It arises briefly, touches awareness lightly, and then dissolves before it can take shape. There is no interest in it and no reaction to it. The mind has stopped treating mental activity as meaningful. Everything that appears is allowed to pass quietly. Time has lost nearly all relevance. There is no sense of how long anything has been happening, and no concern about how long it might continue. Duration feels unnecessary. Moments do not accumulate or move along a line. They rest softly, overlapping without order. Without time, there is no waiting and no urgency. The present moment does not need to lead anywhere. It is complete as it is. Space feels wide in a gentle way, not expansive or dramatic, but softly open. Boundaries feel relaxed. The difference between near and far fades. Everything feels evenly present, held together by the same calm atmosphere. Movement within this openness does not create change. It only creates subtle shifts in sensation that dissolve immediately. Stillness and motion feel almost identical because neither one disrupts the sense of rest. Language continues to recede. Words appear less frequently now, and when they do, they feel thin and light. They do not attempt to explain or describe. They drift through awareness like quiet sounds and fade before forming meaning. Sentences no longer feel necessary. Pauses grow longer and feel complete. Silence feels full, carrying the same calm presence as any sound. Memory has become nearly featureless. It no longer presents images, stories, or references to the past. Experiences that once felt personal have softened into a general familiarity without content. Nothing pulls attention backward, and nothing feels lost. Memory has blended fully into the present atmosphere, leaving no sharp edges behind. The sense of self continues to thin. There is little distinction between experience and the one experiencing it. Sensations arise without ownership. There is no inner commentary and no need to respond. This lack of ownership feels deeply relieving. Without a sense of me managing what is happening, everything is allowed to unfold naturally. Nothing needs to be controlled or protected. The body feels deeply settled. Muscles remain loose without effort. There is no checking for tension because tension no longer feels relevant. The body has stopped holding itself alert. Gravity feels gentle and supportive. The surface beneath the body feels trustworthy. There is no impulse to move or adjust. If movement occurs, it happens quietly and without meaning. Sound, if present, feels distant and unimportant. It does not pull attention or interrupt rest. Sound blends into silence, and silence blends into sound. Both feel equally calming. There is no preference between them. Nothing needs to be filtered or interpreted. Awareness becomes extremely subtle. It is still present, but barely noticeable, like a faint warmth or a soft glow. It does not focus or observe. It does not react. It simply exists quietly, without effort.
Awareness no longer feels separate from rest. It has merged with it, becoming part of the same calm condition. The difference between resting and sleeping has almost completely disappeared. Both feel similar in texture and tone. There is no need to decide which one is happening. The body and mind drift freely between them, without resistance. This drifting feels safe and natural, as if nothing important could be lost. Expectation has fully dissolved. There is no sense that something should happen next, and no sense that something has already happened. Without expectation, tension disappears entirely. The present moment does not need to contain anything meaningful. It is complete simply by being present. Everything that could soften has softened. Everything that could slow has slowed. There is nothing left to adjust, nothing left to release, and nothing left to understand. Rest sustains itself quietly, without effort or intention. If sleep is present, it can remain undisturbed. If sleep is still approaching, it can arrive gently, without announcement. These words do not guide you forward, and they do not pull you back. They soften and fade into the same calm atmosphere that already surrounds you, allowing rest to continue naturally, without ending.
At this depth, rest feels so complete that it no longer asks to be noticed. There is no sense of entering a calmer place or arriving at a quieter moment. Calm has already settled everywhere, evenly and gently, without edges. The body remains supported in a way that feels final without being rigid. Nothing presses, nothing pulls. The surface beneath the body holds it effortlessly, and the body accepts that support without question. There is no evaluation of comfort because comfort has become the underlying condition rather than a sensation to achieve. Breathing continues quietly, but it does not draw attention to itself. The inhale appears softly and disappears softly, and the space between breaths feels smooth and unremarkable. These spaces do not invite focus, they simply exist. Breathing no longer suggests rhythm or timing, it blends into the same calm presence that fills everything else. There is no need to guide it or observe it, the body knows how to continue without instruction. Thought has faded into something barely perceptible. When a trace of thought appears, it does not gather momentum, it does not become language or image. It feels like a faint shimmer that touches awareness and dissolves immediately. There is no curiosity about it and no reaction to its passing. The mind has stopped treating thought as meaningful movement. Everything that arises is allowed to pass quietly, leaving no mark behind. Time feels almost completely absent. There is no awareness of duration and no concern about how long anything has lasted or might last. Moments do not follow one another. They rest together, overlapping gently without sequence. Without sequence, there is no anticipation and no memory pulling attention backward. The present moment does not need to lead anywhere. It remains steady and sufficient on its own. Space continues to soften. Boundaries feel less defined, as if they have relaxed rather than disappeared. Near and far lose their distinction. Everything feels evenly present within the same quiet openness. Movement within this openness does not create change. It only creates subtle variations in sensation that fade as soon as they appear. Stillness and motion feel nearly identical because neither one interrupts the calm that fills everything. Language has almost completely receded. Words appear rarely now, and when they do, they feel thin and gentle. They do not try to describe or explain. They float briefly and then dissolve before forming meaning. Sentences do not need to complete themselves. Pauses grow longer and feel supportive. Silence feels full, carrying the same calm presence as any sound. Memory has softened beyond recognition. It no longer forms images, stories, or references to the past. Experiences that once felt personal have blended into a vague familiarity without content. Nothing pulls attention backward, and nothing feels forgotten. Memory has released its structure and merged seamlessly into the present atmosphere. The sense of self continues to thin until it feels almost transparent. There is little distinction between experience and the one experiencing it. Sensations arise without ownership. There is no inner commentary and no need to respond. This absence of ownership feels deeply relieving. Without a sense of me managing what is happening, everything unfolds naturally and without resistance. The body feels deeply settled, as if it has found its most natural resting position. Muscles remain loose without effort. There is no checking for tension because tension no longer feels relevant. Gravity feels gentle and supportive. The surface beneath the body feels steady and trustworthy. There is no impulse to move or adjust. If movement occurs, it happens quietly and without meaning. Sound, if present at all, feels distant and unimportant. It does not pull attention or interrupt rest. Sound blends into silence, and silence blends into sound. Both feel equally calming. There is no preference between them. Nothing needs to be filtered, interpreted, or understood. Awareness becomes extremely subtle. It is still present, but barely noticeable, like a faint warmth that does not move. It does not focus or observe. It does not react. It simply exists quietly, without effort. Awareness no longer feels separate from rest. It has merged with it, becoming part of the same calm condition. The difference between resting and sleeping has nearly disappeared. Both feel similar in texture and tone. There is no need to decide which one is happening. The body and mind drift freely between them, without resistance or concern. This drifting feels safe and natural, as if nothing important could be lost. Expectation has fully dissolved. There is no sense that something should happen next, and no sense that something has already happened. Without expectation, tension disappears completely. The present moment does not need to contain anything meaningful. It is complete simply by being present. Everything that could soften has softened. Everything that could slow has slowed. There is nothing left to adjust, nothing left to release, and nothing left to understand. Rest sustains itself quietly, without effort or intention. If sleep is present, it can remain undisturbed. If sleep is still approaching, it can arrive gently, without announcement. These words do not guide you forward, and they do not pull you back. They soften and fade into the same calm atmosphere that already surrounds you, allowing rest to continue naturally, without ending.
At this depth, rest no longer presents itself as something to be entered. It is already everywhere, evenly spread, without edges or transitions. There is no moment when calm begins, and no point where it could end. The body remains supported without effort, as if it has always known exactly how to be held. There is no checking for alignment or comfort. The idea of comfort has dissolved into something simpler and quieter, an underlying sense of being settled that does not need to be noticed. Breathing continues in the softest possible way. The inhale arrives without announcement and leaves without trace. The pause between breaths feels open and smooth, like a wide space that does not invite attention. Breathing is no longer something happening to the body. It is simply part of the same calm presence that fills everything else. There is no need to slow it down or guide it. It moves on its own, gently and reliably. Thought has thinned to the point where it feels more like a distant sensation than an idea. When a trace of thinking appears, it does not form into words or images. It feels like a faint movement that fades before it can become anything recognizable. There is no interest in following it and no effort involved in letting it go. The mind has stopped organizing experience into anything meaningful. Everything blends together into a smooth, uninterrupted field.
Time has become almost completely irrelevant. There is no sense of how long anything has been happening, and no curiosity about how long it might continue. Moments do not pass, they simply rest. There is no sequence and no direction. Without time, there is no urgency, no waiting, and no anticipation. The present moment does not need to hold anything special. It is complete without effort. Space feels gently open, without boundaries that need to be identified. The difference between near and far fades. Everything feels evenly present, connected by the same quiet atmosphere. Movement within this openness does not lead anywhere. It only creates subtle shifts in sensation that dissolve immediately. Stillness and motion feel nearly identical because neither one disrupts the calm that surrounds everything. Language has almost fully disappeared. Words appear rarely, and when they do, they feel light and indistinct. They do not try to explain or describe. They float briefly and then fade. Sentences no longer need to complete themselves. Pauses grow longer and feel natural. Silence feels full and supportive, carrying the same gentle presence as sound. Memory has softened beyond recognition. It no longer forms images or narratives. Past experiences do not pull attention backward. They have blended into a vague sense of familiarity without content. Nothing feels remembered and nothing feels forgotten. Memory has released its structure and merged completely into the present atmosphere. The sense of self continues to thin. There is little distinction between experience and the one experiencing it. Sensations arise without ownership. There is no inner commentary and no need to respond. This absence of ownership feels deeply relieving because it removes the need to manage or protect anything. Experience unfolds freely without interference. The body feels deeply at rest, heavy and light at the same time. Heavy because it is fully settled and supported, light because it is no longer holding tension or alertness. Gravity feels gentle and friendly. The surface beneath the body feels steady and reliable. There is no impulse to move or adjust. If movement occurs, it happens naturally and without meaning. Sound, if present at all, feels distant and unimportant. It does not pull attention or interrupt rest. Sound and silence blend together into the same soft background. There is no preference between them. Nothing needs to be filtered or understood. Everything is allowed to remain as it is. Awareness becomes extremely subtle, almost transparent. It does not focus or observe. It does not react. It feels like a faint warmth that simply exists. Awareness no longer feels separate from rest. It has merged with it completely, becoming part of the same calm condition. There is no fear of losing awareness and no need to maintain it. The difference between resting and sleeping has nearly vanished. Both feel similar in texture and tone. There is no need to decide which one is happening. The body and mind drift freely between them without resistance or concern. This drifting feels safe and natural, as if nothing important could be lost. Expectation has dissolved entirely. There is no sense that something should happen next, and no sense that something has already happened. Without expectation, tension disappears completely. The present moment does not need to contain anything meaningful. It is complete simply by being present. Everything that could soften has softened. Everything that could slow has slowed. There is nothing left to adjust, nothing left to release, and nothing left to understand. Rest sustains itself quietly, without effort or intention. If sleep is present, it can remain undisturbed. If sleep is still approaching, it can arrive gently without announcement.
These words do not guide you forward, and they do not pull you back. They soften and fade into the same calm atmosphere that already surrounds you, allowing rest to continue naturally, without ending.
At this depth, rest no longer feels like a condition that changes. It feels like a quiet constant, something that does not begin or end. There is no transition into calm and no transition out of it. Calm has become the atmosphere itself, evenly present and undisturbed. The body remains where it is, supported without effort, without needing to confirm that it is comfortable. Support feels complete and unquestioned. There is nothing to adjust and nothing to check. The body has stopped negotiating with gravity and simply allows itself to be held. Breathing continues so softly that it barely registers. The inhale appears gently and disappears gently, leaving behind a pause that feels smooth and open. These pauses do not feel empty. They feel settled, as if they contain exactly what is needed and nothing more. Breathing no longer suggests rhythm or timing. It blends seamlessly into the same quiet presence that fills everything else. There is no reason to observe it and no reason to guide it. It happens because it always has. Thought has faded into something almost unrecognizable. When a trace of thinking arises, it does not form into words or images. It feels like a faint suggestion that dissolves before it can become anything definite. There is no interest in following it and no effort required to let it go. The mind has stopped treating mental activity as meaningful. Everything that appears passes quietly, without leaving any impression behind. Time has lost all sense of importance. There is no awareness of duration and no curiosity about how long anything has been happening. Moments do not pass or accumulate. They simply rest together, without sequence or direction. Without time, there is no waiting and no urgency. The present moment does not need to lead anywhere. It remains steady and sufficient, without comparison. Space feels gently open and evenly present. Boundaries feel relaxed rather than removed. The difference between near and far fades until it no longer matters. Everything feels connected by the same quiet atmosphere. Movement within this openness does not create change. It only creates subtle shifts in sensation that dissolve immediately. Stillness and motion feel nearly identical because neither one disturbs the calm that fills everything. Language has almost completely fallen away. Words appear rarely now, and when they do, they feel light and indistinct. They do not try to explain or describe. They drift briefly and fade before forming meaning. Sentences no longer need to complete themselves. Pauses grow longer and feel supportive. Silence feels full and steady, carrying the same calm presence as any sound. Memory has softened to the point where it no longer forms images or narratives. Past experiences do not pull attention backward. They have blended into a vague sense of familiarity without content. Nothing feels remembered, and nothing feels forgotten. Memory has released its structure and merged entirely into the present atmosphere, leaving no edges behind. The sense of self continues to thin until it feels almost transparent. There is little distinction between experience and the one experiencing it. Sensations arise without ownership. There is no inner commentary and no need to respond. This absence of ownership feels deeply relieving because it removes the need to manage or protect anything. Experience unfolds freely without interference or resistance. The body feels deeply settled, heavy and light at the same time. Heavy because it is fully resting, fully supported. Light because it is no longer holding tension or alertness. Gravity feels gentle and friendly. The surface beneath the body feels steady and trustworthy. There is no impulse to move or adjust. If movement occurs, it happens naturally and without significance.
Sound, if present, feels distant and unimportant. It does not pull attention or interrupt rest. Sound blends into silence, and silence blends into sound. Both feel equally calming and equally neutral. There is no preference between them. Nothing needs to be filtered, interpreted, or understood. Awareness becomes extremely subtle, almost transparent. It does not focus or observe. It does not react. It feels like a faint warmth that simply exists. Awareness no longer feels separate from rest. It has merged with it completely, becoming part of the same calm condition. There is no fear of losing awareness and no need to maintain it. The difference between resting and sleeping has nearly vanished. Both feel similar in texture and tone. There is no need to decide which one is happening. The body and mind drift freely between them, without resistance or concern. This drifting feels safe and natural, as if nothing important could be lost. Expectation has dissolved entirely. There is no sense that something should happen next, and no sense that something has already happened. Without expectation, tension disappears completely. The present moment does not need to contain anything meaningful. It is complete simply by being present. Everything that could soften has softened. Everything that could slow has slowed. There is nothing left to adjust, nothing left to release, and nothing left to understand. Rest sustains itself quietly, without effort or intention. If sleep is present, it can remain undisturbed. If sleep is still approaching, it can arrive gently, without announcement. These words do not guide you forward, and they do not pull you back. They soften and fade into the same calm atmosphere that already surrounds you, allowing rest to continue naturally, without ending.